Heidi Love in the house, dropping knowledge and facts, uncovering the truth, no need for acting lax. She ain't afraid to speak her mind, breaking through the lies, rising up with love, taking us to new highs. We're living in a world full of secrets and deceit, but Heidi's here to expose, bringing truth to the beast. She's got a message, spreading it far and wide, from addiction to hope. She's on the other side. Ooh, yeah.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Rise with me, Heidi Love. And today I have with me JJ Vance, one of the Occult Rejects. He is over Operation GCD podcast, and he also does one with Nick Fridays, Nick from Occult Rejects. And I met him on a recent podcast, and we had so much in common there that I was like, we have to have a discussion. This is fun. Also, JJ goes by Not the Vice President.
That's right.
I wish that was on there today. I was laughing so bad when you had that. But JJ, how you doing today?
Heidi, appreciate the invite and conversation. It was great meeting you there on the Occult Rejects. Definitely enjoyed the conversation. JJ Vance, yeah, not the vice president. It's my ongoing bit because folks, for whatever reason, confuse me with my distant cousin, the vice president, JD Vance. I get messages on Twixter and whatnot and YouTube.
Oh, that's funny.
Etc. So
I
just lean into the bit, right? If people are going to make the misconceptions, I'll just go ahead and lean into it. But
why not?
GCD, do in like you said, Heidi, an Occult Reject there on routine collaborator there with Nick and the other Occult Rejects on that show. And then I do Fridays every Friday night live with Nick, the host of the Occult Rejects. We just have a conspiracy culture roundtable discussion, which I believe will be joining us here in a few weeks for one of those.
Excited too, because I just love, and people always give me shit because they're like, you're a Christian, but you're all into this occult stuff. I'm like, listen, you will never understand Christianity if you do not understand the other side. There's no light without dark, right?
Sure.
I mean,
that's a good
we have to know. Yeah, we have to know. And so, I mean, I get it. People are oftentimes kind of poking at me with that, but I'm just like, you know what? I was in a cult. Fool me once. I believe in the Bible. I believe in God. I know where I'm at. And if anybody wants to judge me, I mean, the Bible says not to, but hey, it's your prerogative. Right? I mean,
no, I totally agree. And as far as growing up in a cult, myself also growing up Mormon for the first 20 years of my life, it's an interesting environment. I have positive and negative takeaways from the experience. And one of those positives, I suppose, is kind of what makes me a conspiracy theorist today. Growing up in this kind of Gnostic style belief system where everything's kind of a conspiracy and, very not so much anti-U.S. government, but there is almost an anti-U.S. government sentiment to it because it's don't trust the government, don't trust the world type of ideals. So, I kind of credit the Mormons with my my early onset of my conspiracy theorist childhood upbringings.
Same. Too bad they changed it, huh? Now they're all about the government and they run the government. But like when we grew up, it was don't trust the government.
Yeah.
The government sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, in the 80s, late 80s, like this is after, we briefly kind of discussed, I think, offline, maybe on the Occult Reject show, was some of the tumultuous times of the 80s for the Mormon hierarchy there at the mothership, and extenuating circumstances of folks getting blown up and bombs and the entire church doctrine being brought into question. So I mean, I do recall no one was really talking about these things openly, necessarily these subjects within the church, but I do recall late 80s, early 90s, getting into the early priesthoods there within the church, like associated more with the elder men of the church. It was a weird time. It was a weird time in the church.
Definitely. I think we might be close to the same age. I'm 49 this year. Are you close to that?
Yeah, I'll be 44 in a few months.
Okay, so similar decade there. And I definitely remember the Hoffman thing, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is so travesty. Like, look at this scumbag. And then you find out later when he went to prison, right? He's singing like a canary. And then all of a sudden, do you know what happened to him after prison? Like when he was in there and he stopped singing like a canary? This is how Under the Banner of Heaven, this book here became written, because he was there and they said, well, you have press here to see you. And he said, I'm not talking anymore. And they were like, what? Because he had been talking, right? And so the press was like, what is your deal, dude? And supposedly he had a unaliving event where he tried to unalive himself with pills, and he was laying on the floor in a maximum security situation for over 12 hours. And, nobody saw him. Nobody seen him. Nobody did anything. I mean, it's your only job, and,
Right.
one person per cell. Huh, weird. And so nobody helped him, clearly. And what happened was he was fine. However, he laid on his right arm, which was his writing hand, for more than 12 hours. And he has permanent neurological damage to that hand now and can no longer write and copy. He can write basically, but not do what he used to do with the forging. So,
Right. He was one of the most
yeah.
prolific forgers ever known, too, really, quite honestly, it seems.
Yes. And I think that there was maybe a plot. This is just Heidi's thoughts, because the toad story is very real, with Joseph Smith and seeing the toad. And there's multiple accounts and actually affidavits of this. And something like a toad, that's the actual wording, punched him in the face. Right. And
Right.
knocked him backward when he tried to get the plates. And I think this might have been some smart manipulation of the church where they were like, how can we make this better? Because we know that salamanders are not looked on nearly as bad in witchcraft or, with other secret societies, we'll say, like Knights Templar. They're forged by the fire and not burned. And so, they're much better little animal to pop up if we're going to do witches familiars, right? A toad, however, not so much, a little bit dark. So what if they used that situation to their advantage, knowing that Mark was taking advantage of them on money, and kind of being a pest overall with the money situation? And what if they use that to their advantage to blow this all up? Because I found it weird that they put that everywhere, right? You heard about that story that he found this and, oh, it's so exciting, without really giving it time to be vetted. I found that weird.
Yeah, there's a lot of strange aspects with that. The folks that wrote the first anti-Mormon book in our modern era in the 1960s, their names escape me at the moment. They took a weird position against Hoffman in that letter.
The Tanners.
The Tanners, thank you. Yes, the Tanners. They took an anti-Hoffman position, claiming that they were siding with the church against that letter, when the church is obviously trying to distance themselves from this magical rituals that Joseph Smith created the church with. So. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. There's a lot of ins and outs, and quite even strangely enough, as you pointed out, we were talking about before, how all these things really connect. These people all know each other. Mark Hoffman, it seems, likely crossed paths with, well, I guess on paper, what they would call as the post-process era in New York City, circa 1978, 77, during the Son of Sam era in New York City. He was there as a missionary, and he would routinely be visiting occult bookstores. Well, to my assessment, there's only one occult bookstore that was there at the time, and that's the occult bookstore owned by Herman Slater that Peter Levenda talks about. Who Peter Levenda would routinely volunteer at that to be to work there at the bookstore, and was a routine patron. Mark Hoffman seems to be one of the other patrons that were there at the time, along with these other cult characters.
Very interesting. Lavenda's work is like very well done, I think, in my opinion. I know they kind of don't want people seeing that work, probably, but it really goes into some things that are aspects of the church that I think they've buried, like hard bury, with the Salem roots and different things like that. I just think they don't want any of that out there, right? They're like, oh, we don't know where Joseph Smith's parents came from. They were undocumented. No, follow Jesse. Follow the Uncle Jesse. You'll find it. It's right there in their website. I'm not making it up, But since he said no to the interview that day, Under the Banner of Heaven was written because they were like, we'll talk. We're Mormon. Hey, come over here. So that's how that book became. So kind of interesting. Yeah. And that's the
Hoffman affair. Well, if you recall the Netflix documentary, I mean, it seemed odd to me that they had all of his criminal co-conspirators, Badmouth and Hoffman, in there, and all these guys one guy served a few years, but the other fella completely walked. Not to mention whomever was, orchestrating their affairs, it seemed.
Well, and how do you just forget to correctly make the same thing on the bombs that you've made how many times now? So you're just going to forget for yourself and then somehow be fine and unscathed. I mean, seems fishy in general, right?
It does. And the
Yeah.
circumstantial evidence surrounding the varsity jacket coat being one of their key pieces of evidence connecting them, as if no one else had that same coat, etc.
Yes.
And the lack of
So
bomb
strange.
making materials in the search of his property, these things were, to me, they're quite telling if there's more to going on there.
Absolutely fall guy. I mean, I guess, you have to do that once in a while. Somebody has to take the fall. But I do think this book later with these brothers, oh gall, why can't I remember their name right now? Mm, I'll think of it. I think that was a big part of the change for the rituals in the temple. Not only was Beverly Bruff Campbell kind of manipulating that situation, but also this murder where they almost decapitated the wife and the baby. It was like inches from decapitation, and their interest in the school of the prophets and all this stuff. I think it was a little much to have people go back into the temple right around the same year and be doing this number, right?
Sure.
Because it's all over the news. And so it's just interesting. I did have a sit down, interesting enough. Why can't I remember their names? This is driving me wild. Lafferty's, the Lafferty brothers. I sat down with the survivor husband that they kind of tried to pin, and he did not have anything to do with this. And actually, he's devastated to this day. He won't do an interview, but he did sit down with me for almost a 3-hour lunch and tell me the whole thing. And I was beyond shocked. I mean, it was probably one of the most wild things ever. And also my husband was freaking out because I didn't want to take out my phone because I didn't want to be sketchy and be like, messing with something that's a
Right.
recording device because I promised and my word is
Sure.
my bond, not going
Don't
to
want to
go
make them feel
against.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. So he was like, oh my gosh, where the hell are you? And I'm like, oh, sorry. But it was fun and it was eye opening to say the least. I think it was also another semi setup almost to put him, for the blame for everything. But luckily he was unscathed after a decade. I wouldn't say unscathed. I guess he got not arrested and that's
Right.
about it. It ruined a lot of his family life, but he is doing better now. He is doing much better now. And he actually does a lot of positive workshops now and overcoming things. And I think that's just really honorable. So,
Nice.
yeah, weird. It was a weird situation. And also he won't come on because he told me no matter what I say, no one will believe me anyway. That's kind of
Wow.
sad.
That
Yeah.
is sad. So it sounds like he has been through a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting times back then. I mean, it was kind of wild, wild west,
Yeah, I think it's interesting when these things go on within these cults, because again, like maybe on its face, obviously, like Mormonism is not very much related to Scientology and Scientology's alleged dark wing, the process. Now, the process is considered an offshoot, but I would often describe it as modern, is never really being an official offshoot as so much as a cover story of an offshoot in some sort of dark wing of Scientology. Right. And we can
Absolutely.
unpack that idea a little bit, but the crossroads between these organizations seem pretty apparent to me. I mean, obviously, you have modern day Mormonism, Satanism crossovers with the Levitt situation, David Levitt. You got folks like Michael Aquino's wife, the Church of Satan, number 2 guy who starts the Temple of Set. His first wife was a prominent Mormon from a prominent Mormon
Yeah.
family. So
They knew some things and it crosses over often and we just go, And it all seems ridiculous until, like I said, when we spoke last, till you start studying some things about the occult or even just hidden, mystery school type stuff.
right,
Doesn't have to be necessarily nefarious. But it's interesting, nevertheless, with these Egyptian gods and the crossovers. I'm like,
yeah.
wow.
A lot of similarities, and according to the book you mentioned about Lavenda and the origin story of the Mormon Church, he points out that Joseph Smith uses a one of the books the ceremonial magic books that he bases his practice and rituals on is out of the Lesser Kings of Solomon grimoire, which is the same
Yes.
thing L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons used. So you have that ritual magic coming from the same source in both of these groups. You also have ancient alien cargo cult business. So obviously the Mormons, as you know, have this space theology and whatnot. The Scientology obviously does as well, right? And then so does the process. So the process just calls their space overlords the Watchers.
Right. And so what is the Process Church for people that don't know anything about it?
So the Process Church is allegedly an offshoot of Scientology back from circa 1964, when Robert and Marianne de Grimston, two Scientology auditors, so part of, they're not just the lay folk within the church. They're the ones administering the sessions when the folks are holding the cans, the e-meters. So those folks that are administering those sessions are called the auditors. So they're in a prominent role. It's been asserted that Robert de Grimston was an assistant to L. Ron Hubbard at the time. So this is going on over in London, which makes sense. Hubbard was living in London at the time. In fact, Hubbard lived many years in London because he couldn't come back to the U.S. because of IRS situations, and whatnot, and I'm sure other things as well, right? So this is at a time when he's kind of in exile. So to a certain extent, I kind of view this as one of the impetuses surrounding the creation of the process. He's got this assistant. He's an auditor. He's a trusted agent of Hubbard, and he wants to start this new Black Ops operation because his other Black Ops operation may not be working as well. So officially, the Scientology operates something called then it was called the Guardian's Office. Now it's called OSA, Office of, I don't remember what it stands for now. Too many acronyms.
Right. Yeah, they do that, don't they? So we're always confused.
Yes. So exactly. So and Hubbard's basically in exile, and so his associate and his wife, Lydia Grimston, start this offshoot called they claim they call it compulsions analysis. So this is what I'm saying when they claim, and when I say they allegedly start. There's a lot of dubious nature surrounding the circumstances surrounding this cult, from its onset to its alleged implosion, if you will. They allegedly disbanded in 1974, but I'll make that point here in a second. So allegedly they're starting in 64. However, and they're claiming they call themselves compulsions analysis, right? Which they're basically using these Scientology tactics, but they're claiming they know how to do it better, right? And that's a very common trope amongst these Scientologists. They'll try to take the Scientology protocols and tech or whatever, the courses and whatnot, and then try to do it themselves in a different fashion. And that's never been L. Ron and Scientology have long hated that. They call those folks squirrels. They attack them with the most efforts and money they have. They fair game them. If you're familiar with fair game.
Okay.
The practice
that is
basically harassing folks.
Office of Special Affairs, and I find that extremely interesting because if you know about inside the Quorum of the 12, there is the Committee of Special Affairs that does not report to the prophet, and they are over like the regular stuff like Beverly Bruff Campbell and all these things that are not like church. We won't say quote unquote church related business, more PR. Yeah. Sure. So strange.
Well, I'd like to put a pin in that point for later in the conversation here, Heidi, because I have some other correlations between the documented corporate hierarchy of the process and the Mormon Church, and I have some questions around these activities. Because today, so the 64 date is their given date of starting under this idea of compulsions analysis. However, when they incorporated in the UK at that time, they mention that the principles of the organization it's not called compulsions analysis at all. It's called RMG and MA Limited LLC, and it says within their corporate documents that they're doing stuff related to quote unquote the process. And I could bring up a quick picture of that for you to show you this large scale. What I'm getting at, from the very onset of this cult, there's been a large scale kind of disinformation campaign about its purpose, origins, etc. Right. And this is actually a product of the research of Rotting Jules and her Dana of Rotting Jules and her team of researchers. They've done a great job of kind of dispelling a lot of these rumors. They dug up this corporate document from the UK, and you can see here it's called Doubles Limited, formerly known as RMS and MA de Grimston Limited. And this was initially incorporated, like I said, in 1964. but I believe this change was in 1967, the change of the names. And it says the company was formed to provide the framework for the conduct of the business of a group known by its members as the Process. They originally came together in June of 63. So that's where these timelines immediately don't make a lot of sense, right? So
Right.
they
Wild.
leave the UK after that document in 67. They go to the Bahamas. Them and about a core member of about 12 original founding members, right? Mostly all former Scientologists. And
Okay.
for whatever reason, they go to the Bahamas. They claim to be looking to buy an island. Where they're getting the money to purchase this island, I have no idea. Right. Then they go to
Very
the
strange.
Yucatan in Mexico, and that's an area known as Stuhl. And that's where they allegedly got these, messages from some sort of being, right? Or, where they're going to start worshiping Jesus, Satan, Lucifer, and Jehovah, all four gods. Okay. And their idea behind this is these four gods have to coexist together in this world, basically, the reconciliation of opposites. But each section has kind of like, you have the de Grimstons overall, right? Marianne's really the leader. You have figureheads in charge of each sect of these figureheads. For example, the Lucifer branch was run by a man named Timothy Wiley, which was Robert de Grimston's best friend. Now, he would later break off years later and take that branch with him during one of the splinter aspects. So, but they leave Stuhl in 67 and they go to New Orleans in 68 or later that year in 67. I apologize. Into 67, beginning of 68. And it's funny because years later, the IRS would release a report in their wars with Scientology. And that report would say that one of the reasons why they were not willing to reissue tax status to Scientology in the 60s, because they'd revoked it in the late 50s from Hubbard. And the reason why they wouldn't reinstate it in the late 60s, as Scientology was requesting, they cited in the report that a group of Scientologists were conducting paramilitary training in 1967 in Stuhl, Mexico. Well, that was the process.
Oh, that's interesting. What are the four gods that they say they're?
So they claim it's Jesus, Lucifer, Jehovah, and Satan.
Okay. All right. Very interesting.
And I don't think they had any beliefs in these things. I view this as more of a spook situation, a spook operation, not only because it's from Scientology, but it has some machinations from its birth over there in the UK from MI6 and the Tavistock Institute.
Oh boy.
So
it from the get-go, it's just all a big op.
It seems that way.
I mean,
so
yeah.
Before they make it to America, I think that this is a lot of the planning and training and stuff. And I think the mission was America, right? Again, I think this is an Anglo-influenced anti-American effort in large parts. And when I say effort to control America, so in 1963, the fellow that founded and was one of the board leaders of the Tavistock Institute. Are you familiar with the Tavistock?
Yes.
Heidi?
Yes.
Very, very influential organization. They actually invented the trans stuff we see in our modern era. They were the ones that started all the trans surgeries over there. They've shut them down. They've forced to shut them down recently, though.
Yeah, and even the very first one, and I'm not saying for people that suffer from situations, but even the very first one they completed, the person unalived themselves because they were so very unhappy. So multiple infections, it just like destroyed their life. So yeah, it was.
Yeah, well, the science is rooted in some really, I say science is rooted in some really questionable stuff with that Money fella and his experiment with those two twins that he did that I believe both killed themselves. So
yeah, it's so sad.
Dubious nature of origins of the whole experience. But yeah, Tavistock's the one largely perpetrating these activities. And again, the UK government recently shut that down. But so they're very influential to this day there, with controlling society, that is.
Wow. That's wild.
But
yeah, all of this makes sense.
All this makes sense? The spook operations of it?
Oh, yeah.
So in 63, a fellow by the name of Eric Trist, he'll come and play later with another character that I know you've covered, Heidi, Jillian West. So he goes through. He's again founder of Tavistock. he writes a paper called social discussing something called social turbulence. It's essentially it's a theory to control society, social engineer and control society and human behaviors through essentially what could almost be described as a mass scale MK Ultra experiment, because it's inflicting terror, trauma, and chaos on society and human behaviors in order to mold those behaviors in society in a manner in which they want to mold it.
Okay.
That's
Goes back to that Hegelian dialectic, like one spoonful at a time, right?
basically right.
Oh boy.
So they're putting this on paper. This guy's Eric Trist. He then leaves the Tavistock. At this, he comes to America at the same time that the process does. He goes to UCLA and is a co-worker of Louis Jolyon West of all people. His son Alan Trist would become the best friend of Jerry Garcia and the president of the Grateful Dead's music publishing company. So if you want to talk CIA, MK Ultra, spook operations, the Trist boys are at the center of that. And again, they're at the center of the process stuff too, at least the father.
Right. Yeah. It's wild how many of them are with military fathers, like the Doors had a military father. All this, I'm sure you're probably going to get into, but it's not on accident, is all I'm saying.
No, and that's a good point. It's not an accident, and it's not an accident later when you see the confluence of these activities, intersecting with the music and movie stars of Hollywood again in the Laurel Canyon scene, right? So it's it's at the same time, right? These are all going on at the same time. When you see the Charles Manson in the Laurel Canyon scene, again, Charles Manson connected to the Beach Boys, connected to movie producers, right? Connected to, all sorts of things, and allegedly a major figure in the process. So that, I jumped ahead a little bit there because that's, when they first get to they got to New Orleans first, right? So in New Orleans in '67, they incorporate. Like I said, they had incorporated as that other company in the UK. They come to America and incorporate in New Orleans in, I don't want to get the date wrong here and I'll point out here the changes in the narrative that is displayed publicly by these folks versus what these actual dates and records say. But the let's see here we go. I can share this with you.
Sure.
So that when they initially incorporate in New Orleans, it's the attorney that incorporates them. It's June 21st, 1968. I'm sorry, it's actually Baton Rouge, but they incorporate in Louisiana. Their process location was in New Orleans, though. The process house. Their other operation.
Interesting place, huh?
Right. A lot of
we'll leave that alone right now. Yeah.
Right. And the guy that incorporates them here in June 21st of '68 is Tommy Jude Baumler. He's the attorney working out of Guy Bannister's office, the focal point of the Jim Garrison JFK investigation. And much like the rest of those characters, Tommy Jude Baumler was a wandering bishop in the American Orthodox Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Which weirdly Lavenda had some ties to on accident, I think.
Right. Well, it's strange, right? Because Lavenda's also
lived there, right? Like, or something. Yeah.
He's everywhere. He's like the Forrest Gump of the occult world in the 70s.
He really is. Yeah, he really is. And we do owe a little nod to him. So on those books, I will just say, you guys, if you want to check out his books, they are the ones that are really good for like Mormonism or this kind of stuff. Sinister Forces, The Angel and the Sorcerer, and Holy Alliance is really helpful with this kind of stuff. So.
No, I definitely recommend folks check those out. I mean, I've read them all. I learned a lot. I mean, again, I have my ideas of maybe some of Lavenda's motivations in life and whatnot, but especially with Sinister Forces, he kind of hits you with a Shyamalan twist in Volume 3 that the Republicans did. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but I'm not willing to accept that conclusion.
It's very interesting, but always there are truth with some. They have to sneak in the other stuff, so it's still good. Just be aware. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Volume 1 and Volume 2, fantastic. Volume 3, two thumbs way down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You could have wrapped that story up better. So yeah, it is weird how he kind of dances around all these characters. Yeah, including the American Orthodox Catholic Church. He knew the head, Walter Profeta, and he met him at RFK's funeral. In fact, when he snuck in there as a priest, apparently, according to Lavenda's tale. So that is interesting, right? So
very weird.
Well, this. How familiar are you with the American Orthodox Catholic Church, Heidi?
Well, I know that it had no parishioners, and it just had a
Correct.
bunch of spooks dressed as priests that all started popping off dead.
There you go. You know the long and the short of it. And all these characters were subject to the Jim Garrison investigation, including David Ferry. And a lot of them, much like David Ferry and his associate Jack Martin, they all met untimely deaths during the Jim Garrison investigation. So the head of the American Orthodox Catholic Church on the board at the time was J. Edgar Hoover.
Big surprise.
So it almost to me seems like a Hoover, almost maybe even a personal spook, outfit, right? Like not the official COINTELPRO situation, but some sort of more closely guarded situation. Let me get that page back up.
So. Yep, you're good.
No, it timed out on me. I want to go over a couple more of the name changes that go through.
You got it. We'll put it back up here.
So so it's an odd epicenter of activities when they get to New Orleans, and again, so they stay. I just wanted to give a quick overview on how they.
You're good.
So everyone claims that the Process Church ended in 1974, right? May 21st. Well, they did and they didn't. They just changed their names, right? So they continue to operate under the same corporate structure, the same corporate documents, right? Their articles of incorporation filed from the state of Louisiana, which I finally got to see last year from the Ed Sanders archive.
Oh, nice.
He had a copy in there.
Oh.
So when they say it ended in 74, it's not true. The same people continued on, the same group continued on under the same corporate, structure, under the same articles of incorporation. They simply changed the name on the front of the building, so to speak, right? The Foundation Church of the Millennium in 76, the Foundation Faith of the Millennium in 78, Foundation of Faith of God in 1993, and then finally the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary, where they exist today in Utah.
Very interesting.
Mormon country.
Of course. Are they at all connected with the 1001 Club?
Oh, I don't know that club.
Oh, this is interesting. It's about also wildlife and blah, blah, blah. So kind of an interesting little possible
1001?
Yep.
Okay.
1001. So
I'll have to get back to you on that question because it is interesting.
Yeah.
They do find this is a highly well-financed operation for an animal sanctuary. They rake in hundreds of millions of dollars. They're traveling everywhere. They got planes, they got cars, they got buses. Very, very high financed well-financed outfit. But the thing I find most interesting is when you're looking here and playing these games with their corporate structure. And again, the reason why folks such as the Son of Sam, Netflix documentary and other documentaries and other books published about the process today, they all tout the same propaganda line that the process ended in 1974, when in fact, as I just demonstrated, they did not. They operated under the same articles of incorporation for the same purposes with the same people. They just changed their name. And then they go to Utah, allegedly in 1984, and incorporate there. I'm sorry, 1994. They go there in 84, but allegedly incorporated there for the first time in 94, as their story goes. But if you look at their documents here, that's not the case. So the Best Friends Animal Society later changed to the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary. The Best Friends Animal Society, they claim here as the Utah documents to have been founded there as a domestic nonprofit corporation on the same date they incorporated in Louisiana. If that's true, then they would have been a foreign nonprofit corporation, not a domestic. See, foreign right here on the 1984 filing. So something ain't right with these filings. But today they do sit in Kanab, Utah. There's no doubt about that.
Very interesting.
And it's the founders.
Oh, they always pop up, don't they?
The Mormons.
The Mormons. People always say it's the other word we can't say with 3 letters. But it starts with a J, right? It's them. But I think it's all of them. I don't think it's one person, like one group. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a collaborated effort. And when we see, things like this, where obviously at a time, so when they moved to Utah, again, this is the founders, right? So I'll go back to the 74 divide to kind of explain this timeline. So in 74, Robert, Mary, and the Grimston get divorced. And that is the change there. And it does appear Robert de Grimston took a portion of the cult to Staten Island, right? And they would later be involved in the affairs at Willowbrook, in the child kidnappings, rapes, and murders of children there and around this Willowbrook mental hospital, right?
That
And a
is a
fellow by the name of Andre
sad.
Rand. Oh,
That is
it's
a
a very dark
sad
tale.
thing.
Very
Yeah.
dark tale. Well, a lot of the children are mentally handicapped.
Yes.
So
Very
dark
yucky.
tale.
Mm-hmm.
So that does seem to have occurred. The Grimston, Robert de Grimston takes a portion of them over there, and then those scandals pop up, and NYPD looks into some of that stuff, and it gets squashed. That's the ongoing affair with all these process activities. Anytime folks start looking into the process, the matters get squashed and investigations go away, including the FBI. They have public documents of how they looked into them in the early aughts, and the same thing happened then. Yeah.
Protection.
Can you give me 1 second, Heidi?
Of course.
Apologize.
No, you're fine.
I apologize.
Okay. I'm going to take an allergy pill. I keep coughing and coughing. So me and my asthma.
So there are these separations, right? So these things do occur. So when they claim these narratives, but to me it's darker because these offshoots and these splinter actions, whether or not they're actually offshoots and splinter actions, is a different story altogether. But they all tend to do the same thing, and that's circling around high profile murders, parapolitical events, and assassinations. No matter where they go, that's and drug running and gun running and kid diddling and child pornography. This is the trail of activities. No matter where you find these groups and splintered offshoots, these are the activities surrounding that area in that time. And
always hiding behind philanthropy, right? Always.
Well, I mean, look at the no kill animal shelter. They're the largest. I mean, that's speaking of philanthropy right there. And
it's always the
appearance, right?
Yep.
But so there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, a lot of investigation reports by law enforcement over the years, building a case against the activities surrounding these groups and the activities they're involved in. But from the after 74, from the Son of Sam murders there in New York City to the Atlanta child killings, I would even assert, and so would the author Maury Terry, I believe, the author of Ultimate Evil. He never publicly stated this, but he got deep into the OJ case because a lot of the folks who were involved in the OJ Simpson murder trial are also surrounding this whole process movement. So I think there's another example, right? So these things continue to go on, and I suspect they go on to this day, and I have a lot of ideas of how these operations have evolved. They most certainly did not go away. They most certainly did not disband. Like I said, if anything, they've grown through various franchises of splinter offshoots. But one of the things that, again, I think that speaks to the nature of their activities being spook operations, again, is the political assassinations they're associated with as well. I mean, the criminal hood rat stuff is one thing, but when they're associated with JFK and RFK type assassinations, then you have to start really considering the weight of the power behind this group.
So do any of them link to Permindex or like any offshoot thereof?
Absolutely.
All right, let's go.
Absolutely. So according to the author Maury Terry, he died in 2015, I believe. His files have been basically cordoned off from public view, and then when that Netflix documentary came out, I believe in 2019 or 2020, it became a real issue with these files and stuff in the release. So there's this weird release stuff around the files. There's a website that's allegedly posted all the files. They haven't, there's a lot of games being played for some reason, but in the portion of the copy of the files that I got from Maury Terry, he identifies and has David Berkowitz sign a letter commenting on the cult members that Berkowitz was associated with relative to the Son of Sam murders. Not necessarily the folks involved in the shootings or necessarily even the planning, but the other members of their cult that were in higher positions as well. So maybe not, for example, Berkowitz signs this letter identifying then New York City Mayor Ed Beam's son. I believe his name is Abe Beam. Maybe I have the names mixed up here. Let me look. As one of those members I'm sorry, Bernard Beam. I think it was Ed
okay.
Beam was the mayor. Bernard Beam was the son. So, there was also a member of Beam's staff that's on this list. So, I don't think, when Berkowitz is signing this letter, he points out that not all these people were involved in necessarily the planning, but they were involved in the cult ritualistic activities. So they were it was advantageous to them to make sure none of this stuff ever got out, because it would divulge other stuff from the cult. So I think that
Seems like that
a lot of
happens
people.
so much, like DeMore and Schild's papers. Oh, we can't release that.
Right.
All these
Right.
people. Yeah.
Well, the character you're going to enjoy on this list there, Heidi, I think is none other than Roy Cohn.
Roy is in everything. And for people to just blindly trust the protege of Roy Cohn is phenomenally weird to me. I'm not saying that the previous person that ran us, right? Like, okay, whatever, was any better. I'm just saying, like, it's something to put in your back pocket. Yeah.
Sure. Do you see this letter here? Can you put that on the screen? Because I'll go over some of these names here for us. But so, as you can see at the bottom, David Berkowitz signs this. This is 1996. Maury Terry and some other witnesses signed this. This is just a list of names. The first page of this letter was
it's the Diddy list
activities
before the Diddy list.
We're getting this before the Epstein list, right?
Yes, exactly.
But you'll see on this list, he goes from the top where you see the Carrs and whatnot, John Michael Wheat and all these folks. So the Carrs are deeply associated with Scientology, including Michael Carr, who was apparently working out of the Guardian's office, that kind of, publicly facing kind of spook operation wing of Scientology. That I allege that the process is more of the dark side of that operation. So Michael Carr was working for them. There's allegations that other Carr family members were also part of Scientology. So, right at the top, you have your Scientology connections, you know what I mean, as well, to this whole movement of the process and this quote unquote cult of the children. And then a lot of the folks you see here, including, I'll go through a quick synopsis of some of these characters. Walter Ace Brown, major pimp of children in New York City. He pops up as a police informant in numerous investigations, not the least of which was the son of Sam. Then you have, let's see, again, a lot of these folks in here, like the Suzanne Conway character, not a publicly known figure, but major figure in the cult scene there in Westchester County, it seems. And, that's what I'm saying. You don't get a lot of the context here, but you see right here, Roy Radin. He was the producer. Well, first of all, he had a mansion on and out in the Hamptons, and he was investigated for the brutal rape and assault of Melanie Holler, an actress from the TV show Welcome Back, Kotter.
Oh no!
He skirted all those charges and ended up getting just a gun charge on that situation. Nonetheless, Terry asserted he was the leader of the East Coast kind of wing of the process. He's later murdered in Los Angeles in '84 by Bob Evans and gang. So that's one of the major connections of the OJ case that I think Terry was interested in, was Bob Evans' connections, the legendary Hollywood film producer who hired Roman Polanski to make Rosemary's Baby, and both Bob and Roman were on that set every day. So that seemed to be a very important effort.
Pedo director that ran for his life. Yeah,
exactly. Well,
Jack Nicholson's buddy.
Well, they both made their names courtesy of Cocaine Bob Evans. So the reason why he's called Cocaine Bob is because he gets busted for cocaine trafficking, I think in '81, and he skirts all charges and does some PSA commercials like "Don't do drugs," right? So. He gave himself the name. He said he would forever be known as Bob Cocaine Evans, and I agree. So he made these people, Jack Nicholson, Roman Polanski. He's the guy that made them stars. And when Polanski, after he raped that 13-year-old at Jack Nicholson's house, they called Bob Evans to come clean up the situation. Bob Evans would also introduce Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski to one another.
It's wild.
Right.
They're all related
with these folks, right?
They're all related or in bed together. I swear.
For sure. So going further down this list here, right here, you see some folks like these have been, again, not really publicly known names, but these Donovan people. They were alleged leaders in the cult activity there in Westchester County, Yonkers area, related to the son of Sam in the process. So when the process disbanded in 1974, their headquarters was in Westchester County, right? Pound Ridge, just north of Yonkers. So these people were, these Donovans, amongst other folks related to the early members of the process. They were major real estate figures in that county. For example, one of the founding members, who's still a member and living out there on the ranch in Utah, Batista, I believe it is the name, is the offspring of another major real estate figure there in Westchester County, who was an associate of these Donovans. So, there's a lot of networking that goes on there that maybe not still has yet to be identified, but this is the stuff that,
And in the 70s, remember this, people, who was involved in real estate in the 70s with Roy Cohn.
right. Well,
boy.
You make a solid point. There's a faction of folks in the Son of Sam community that like to draw comparisons to one of the Son of Sam murder suspect sketches, police sketches, and Donald Trump.
It's very interesting that he pops up everywhere. I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm just saying. And people have come at me about some of these pictures I showed. Like, there's no proof he was dressed up like that. That was a picture that was vetted from Studio 54, where he was dressed up all girly. It's vetted. Right. It was at it was at a birthday bash or something, like a Halloween bash. It's a vetted photo. People just don't like it. So,
well, and Donald Trump himself has spoken about being at Studio 54. I believe that's where later Michael Jackson would live next door to them in Trump Tower, but I believe that's probably when he met Michael Jackson, because Michael Jackson would hang out at Studio 54. And also,
they were mad because he dressed up, a little girly. So,
with that picture you showed, I could see where that might get some people butthurt. Also there, besides Roy Cohn, Michael Jackson, and Donald Trump at that time, is David Berkowitz, allegedly. So I like to joke that maybe all four of those guys were moonwalking together around the dance floor of Studio 54.
There it is. That's what moonwalk. That's so aptly named.
So
too bad one of their gods wasn't Jupiter. Okay, keep going.
Well, I don't know enough about the occult theology, so there may be some more correlations there for sure. But you see Roy Cohn right here on the list. So this was This was David Berkowitz was telling Maury Terry he's seen all these people, he's dealt in cult dealings with all these people, and he identifies Roy Cohn as being part of that. So in that investigation by NYPD later associated with these activities, they would come across an informant that would claim that there was a number of bodies buried on Roy Cohn's, allegedly buried on the farm of Roy Cohn's father up there just north of Westchester in Fairfield County, Connecticut, the next state and county over there. And they would these detectives would allegedly go to that farm and request a search. And apparently, when they thought they might find something and wanted to bring in some LiDAR, I believe it was some LiDAR technology, the Roy Cohn's father shut it down. So why he initially let them on the property at all is a different story altogether. Who knows? But nonetheless, one of those kids allegedly buried there was the first milk carton kid, Eton Pats.
Oh, wow.
So he was allegedly kidnapped. There's somebody else in prison today, years later, for that child's disappearance and murder. However, it seems, based upon varying apparent alleged eyewitness statements and folks associated with the cult, that is the case.
How sad. How many of these people are in prison that are actually innocent,
Right. I think a lot. I think that's part of the cult activities, right? I think one of the things they like to do is set folks up. And I have some great examples of that. And when we get to if you want to discuss when we get to the discussion of more of the parapolitical stuff surrounding like the Atlanta child killings, for example.
Awesome. Yeah. And I have no time frame, so don't feel rushed or anything like that.
No, yeah, I'm good. I got some time here as well.
Okay.
Not a problem. So I think going over the rest of this list, a lot of folks probably never heard of the rest of these names. I mean, some of them are nicknames, but then you get down to folks like Patrick O'Shaughnessy, right? He's a member of the Yonkers PD, right? So you have, Wheat Carr's husband she was a dispatcher. Her husband was a part of Yonkers PD. So
Shaughnessy was involved with something, because that name sounds familiar, like a problem, I think. Maybe. I don't know. That sticks out to me for some reason. I'll have to look it up later, but I think he might have been involved in some problem. I'll have to look.
Yeah, it's still an Irish name. I don't know much about the O'Shaughnessy clan, but or O'Shaughnessy, but
Yeah,
It's certainly
exactly.
possible. Then you see like some folks from Minot that Berkowitz apparently traveled out to Minot with John Carr at the Air Force Base there. And there's a lot of documented stuff from the law enforcement reports out there of the witchcraft, quote unquote, witchcraft activity surrounding these folks. And then Berkowitz mentions Robert de Grimston right there, and a female companion that he did not know. So it seems like, Berkowitz was very ingrained within these activities relative to the Son of Sam stuff and the cult activity in the 70s there in New York City, specifically around Westchester and, as far as the center of operations. But if Roy Cohn's got victims buried on farms and stuff, that seems to speak to me that he was a far more important figure in this movement than people
Right.
realize.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and
Wild.
when you're speaking to the upper echelons of power in this country over the years, I mean, Roy Cohn's kind of there, right? I mean, from the McCarthy hearings. There we go. I couldn't think of it. From McCarthy hearings kind of on forward. I mean, he's a major figure in DC politics.
Absolutely. He was all over everything at that time.
And Permindex.
Yeah. Definite. On the board. Yes.
On the board of Permindex.
So strange.
That situation has never really been effectively understood.
No, that it's got so many, and then this, and then this, and then it's all over the place. So,
but
who knows?
I think one thing that could be yielded by looking at this list and folks like Roy Cohn and his other associations with things like Permindex and the JFK assassination, and the fact that the process was incorporated by the attorney, that was involved in that whole mix out of New Orleans as well. I think a lot can be said with, these are extensions of perhaps larger, more older spook operations, right? Like maybe the process begins in 64 and comes to America in 67, but like, what's the connections with Roy? How does Roy Cohn get associated with this, right? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
He's already associated with these other similar activities through Permindex, right?
Seems very strange. Yeah. All the players are odd together because Permindex's board had like fascist and ex-Nazis, or Nazi sympathizers with Cohn, who's Jewish, that doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. Yeah. It's weird.
It's very weird. And if you did you see this other timeline I popped up there? If we can switch to that one. I'd like to show you how. I'd like to show you how. So we kind of covered the details of the factual timeline of events, right? Yeah. With their, at least with their changes in incorporation documents, et cetera. The fact they didn't end in 74. So this
definitely not.
This was published by Feral House Publishing Company in a book, I believe in 2016, a book, Love, Sex, Fear, and Death, which was kind of like an official history of the Process Church, right?
Okay.
In this timeline, this is what I call the propaganda timeline, because you'll see here things such as Robert and Marianne quit Scientology, right, in 63. Then they start in 63 to 66, something called compulsions analysis. There's no record of this compulsions analysis. Again, even that UK document calls it the process back in 64. So, this whole idea later that was adapted to this compulsions analysis thing is, to me, very suspect, because again, we have evidence in the opposite. So, it kind of goes again through their activities in the UK, which a lot of these things I have questions about, but more of a meta analysis. They go to Rome in 69. So after they come to America, they do branch out in other places, including places like Rome, where today, speaking of these kind of connections of power, religion, and spook activities, Rome's an interesting spot. And they have their official Process Church Museum there today.
Oh.
Which is, kind of, and there's pictures. If you go on the social media accounts of that museum, you'll see pictures of the founders from Utah visiting that place.
Very nice.
Right. So then you'll get down here. It says in 1974, the Process Church of the Final Judgment changes its name to the Foundation Church of the Millennium, and Marianne takes over the sole leadership of the community. In part, that's true, right? In part, that is true because she does change it to that name. It's still the same corporation, though, the same corporate documents. And allegedly, Robert is no longer associated with the community. So that part is at least somewhat accurate. But again, they're bending the facts around here to shape this narrative that the process church no longer exists. And Robert just went off into obscurity, right? That's kind of the tale, right? Because everything else past this point focuses only on Marianne and the trips through from New York to Atlanta. So the Foundation Faith of the Millennium, there at the end of the 70s, post Son of Sam, they go set up shop in Atlanta. And then what happens next? The Atlanta child killings.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that happens down here in 70. Oh, they left that off of here. Okay, well, that's fun. I didn't realize they left that off of here too. So they go to Atlanta and they're there. I believe it's 1979, early 1980, just prior to the killings. And when I was saying before about folks associated with this cult that seem to be focused on framing other people's for these crimes, there's a character by the name he's the most prolific serial killer you've probably never heard of. His name's Edward Wayne Edwards. Right.
I've not heard of him.
Very dark figure. He's infamous for setting other people up for these murders, and he murdered folks over about a 50-year time period before he finally got caught and then admitted to a few other murders to try to get the death sentence.
Oh wow.
So in 1980, he's definitely an occultist. He's definitely associated with these kind of occult networks. Whether or not he's officially a process member is certainly up for discussion. However, he goes to Atlanta. He's already been murdering folks for 40 years. He was the number one top most wanted person on the FBI's list in 1961. He very prolific guy. Served some time in the 60s, got out in the 70s, convinced everybody he changed. Wrote a book called Metamorphosis of a Criminal. Traveled America, published the book himself, faked a publishing company, traveled America on TV shows and radios, describing how he's no longer a criminal, apparently murdering people the entire time in the 70s.
Oh,
right?
No. Oh boy.
So he even goes on the TV show to tell the truth out there in Hollywood, where they have three folks telling their stories, right? The contestant, if you will. And then you have the panel of like three Hollywood actors or whatever trying to decide who's telling the truth. He's one of the contestants on To Tell the Truth there.
Isn't that weird that happened with another one?
Rodney Alcala.
Yeah.
The dating game killer.
Weird. Yeah.
Right. Same time frame too. Same time frame. They're both on TV at the same time frame in the late 70s.
So strange.
Edward Wayne Edwards was later we find out he's faking being a doctor, faking making diplomas and stuff. And that's how he's infiltrating into folks' lives. Well, he did something else to infiltrate into folks' lives to commit his crimes in Atlanta. He infiltrated the Atlanta Child Killing Task Force, dressed up as a Marietta Police Department sergeant. He would the uniform would later be found in an arson fire in Pennsylvania when he tried to destroy the evidence, and he's later arrested for that arson fire at another Marietta PD sergeant's house in Atlanta in 1984. So just after they're convicting Wayne Williams for these crimes.
Wow.
So why is this prolific serial killer who's deeply involved in these cult networks infiltrating the Atlanta child, task? I'll bring up a picture of it. There's a guy that's written a book on this subject. There's only one guy that's really written a book on this subject, and he in that book he includes a picture. It sounds preposterous, but he includes a picture of Edward Wayne Edwards in that Marietta with that the Marietta police folks down there. So there is documented evidence of these things, but so and again the uniform was found in a fire that he was trying to destroy the evidence in Pennsylvania. So why is this dude infiltrating the police task force down there and what seems to be a very process related activity, creating chaos, right? It was allegedly the black community was having all these kids murdered, right? The Atlanta child killings, they were all black kids. Everyone around town was alleging it was a white fellow dressed as a cop as the culprit. Turns out later there's a guy that fits that description, right? So the idea that these things aren't related, I think, is a stretch, but it certainly grounds for further research nonetheless. But he it makes no sense to me. You'd have this guy down there infiltrating stuff and et cetera, but he nonetheless, this is the tools and tactics of I think these killers that are around these things. They frame other people for these things, and that's what there's dozens of cases in this book called by a guy by the name of John Cameron, and he outlines he outlines the number of people that Edward Wynne Edwards set up for murders, some of which he testified. Edward Wynne Edwards would testify in the trials against some of these people as a witness. He'd be a police informant on the matter, testify in the trial. So he's framing people all over the country for decades. And
typical classic inserting himself into the case.
Exactly. And I think this is a larger mode of operations amongst this kind of process cult network, right?
Odd. Very. Like, and why do they blow up some people to such an extent with serial killings when you've got people like this that just skate under the radar? Weird.
Right.
You know?
Right. The yeah, I mean, all of these things, I think some great questions, because again, what does cause somebody to get punished and other people to walk, right? And you know, the same can be said for a lot of this stuff, you know, related to, you know, any of these kind of cases related to the process, because, you know, Berkowitz is in prison, but, you know, there's clear evidence other folks were associated, right? You know, Sirhan was identified as being associated with the process amongst, you know, obviously his, you know, the other associated mind control assassin aspects to the situation. You know, there's so much evidence that there's, you know, that he's not the one who murdered RFK, you know, but why is he sitting in jail today, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I can't remember I have it on my notes, who his mentor was there at the stables, but he was a adept occultist. I mean, they talk about him, so it's weird. Yeah. It's just kind of sad for these people, you know, and you look at him now and his whole life is wasted, you know.
Very sad.
Very.
So Ed Sanders wrote a book about Manson, contemporary to the Manson trial and everything. He was a beatnik guy, you know, out of the Greenwich, New York scene, but he knew a lot of the folks out there in that scene too. So I think he got a lot of, you know, leeway into his investigation. He got sued by the Process in America, his publishing company did, and they took out that chapter from his book. They won in the when they lost in the U.S. It's because the publishing company just folded. They fought it in the UK and they won. Right. So this is from the UK book of Ed Sanders, The Family, talking about the Sirhan situation and Sharon Tate. And according to Sanders there, it's an INS officer wrote in his 1974 report regarding Sirhan attending parties on behalf of the Satanist English cult, including one at Sharon Tate's place. So that is the process. That's Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski's house. Again, Bob Evans introduces this couple. You know, Manson hangs out at that house, right? They all know Manson. You know, these things are, there's a lot of elements of these things that have been known about for many years, but no one really discusses, right? These things are all brushed aside, swept under the rug.
Yeah, there's got to be a reason. I mean, yeah.
But Sirhan certainly seemed to be, he had Rosicrucian stuff going on, which, you know, according to the files of I looked at a lot of the files of Ed Sanders that are Princeton archives, and he seemed to think that Manly P. Hall was associated with this movement. Are you familiar with that name?
Yeah, no, he was. He attended workshops, and I there was a book. I gotta find the name of it, but I read through this book, and he had some very compelling actual evidence about his occult teacher per se, and attending actual, like, there was attendance logs or something at Manly P. Hall's for Sirhan, and the fact that he disappeared for 3 weeks. He disappeared, and his mom was freaking out.
It's documented, right? It's documented that Sirhan had a relationship with Rosicrucianism, including the Manly P. Hall Center there in Los Angeles. So Manly P. Hall, major figure in Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism there. And according to some witness accounts reported to Ed Sanders, Manly P. Hall was running this kind of process offshoot type situation called the Four Pi, and run by the Grand Chingon, which folks referred to Manson as the Grand Chingon at times. But also I think that's more of a kind of a hierarchical name where there's maybe numerous Grand Chingons and like an ultimate kind of Grand Chingon. But anyhow, according to Ed Sanders' notes and files investigation, he seemed to track that to Manly P. Hall and some epicenter of activity revolving a cult that he was in charge of. He was the Grand Chingon, alleged by some. So, you know, this relationship between Sirhan and Rosicrucianism shouldn't be ignored and should also be considered in the same conversation as the process.
And that book, for people just because I like to quote because people will come at me. CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys by Patrick Nolan. And he lays out, I don't have my notes here, the names, everything of these occultists that were very close with him. So after he had a TBI from being thrown from a horse. So
Right. I think on its face, it's easy to say these are two different cults, but what I'm getting at is not only that's just the forward-facing view of these things, right? Like if Manly P. Hall is associated with Sirhan Sirhan through Rosicrucianism, and Sirhan Sirhan is associated with the process, and apparently, according to at least some circumstantial evidence, Manly P. Hall is associated with that same movement, then these are indeed the same organization.
mm-hmm. Yep.
Different
They
heads of
just
the same
changed their
hydra.
names. Yeah, all the same, right? Different snakes. Yeah. Different snake kids.
So,
Wild.
like I said, there's been numerous kind of investigations into these kind of things over the years, and they all get squashed. But there are elements of these investigations that seem to yield, important, facts to demonstrate that these are all connected, like the Sirhan stuff. And there was a report regarding like I said, the out of a PI firm out of New York City regarding connections between the Son of Sam and the Atlanta child murders.
Mm-hmm.
So, in which mentions the process, it mentions Scientology. So these are the mentions, obviously, Wayne Williams. One of the more salient characteristics, instead of reading I'll share this document with you. It was
Awesome.
a product of, like I said, it's that process research group over there at Rotting Jewels and Gang. I'd never seen it before they had produced it, and I've been looking at stuff for a while before that. So this seems to be an odd document, but it points out how in the Son of Sam rituals they were incorporating some sort of Buddha statue. And this Buddha statue was also allegedly being incorporated in around the rituals of homicidal rituals or ritual deaths at Atlanta child killings and Wayne Williams. So there's some comparisons like that. And speaking to the Buddha statue that I find interesting, Manly P. Hall, according to Ed Sanders' notes, that four pi, as they called it, kind of offshoot of the process, they had kind of mashed together some sort of Kali worship and Buddhism. So it was some sort of ritual, human sacrifice, Kali worship Buddhism cult, right? So when I see that reports that later tell me that they're using these Buddha dolls in their ritual human sacrifice ceremonies in multiple locations from New York to Atlanta, again, I don't think folks fully understand maybe what's going on here, but it's not like, because on its face, I think those concepts seem kind of conflicting, especially when you're mashing together so it was like some sort of Japanese Kali worshiping Buddha situation. So that's what I'm saying. Like these things, at least on their face, seem conflicting, but within these organizations, they've mashed these elements together, and I think that's a telling feature of the collective nature and ongoing activities of this group, whatever they want to call themselves. Right. Look at their actions, not their words. Right.
Yeah. Watch the fruits. Yep. Absolutely. Wild.
And another major political assassination that I've looked to try to connect them to directly, and all I can say is they're indirectly related to it. So, are you familiar with the 1972 shooting of George McGovern, the Democratic candidate?
Mm-mm.
So he was the governor of Alabama. He was running against Nixon in 72 as a Democratic candidate.
Very interesting.
What's that?
Interesting already with Nixon, right?
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
yep.
And again, when you see the Nixon's, the president after Nixon, there Ford, he gets two attempted assassinations by Manson girls. You have to ask what is going on with all this process-related political assassination activity. JFK, RFK, McGovern, Ford, right?
Yep.
So this is George McGovern in a photograph with the Foundation of Faith of the Millennium, I believe it is. They're definitely or the Foundation of Faith of God. So it's one of the subsequent name changes of the same group of the process in the late 70s. So this is after he's shot, because he gets shot in 72. But I asked the question of, if they're connected to all these other parapolitical assassination attempts, were they, associated with the 72 shooting of George McGovern here at a campaign stop in Washington, D.C. in Maryland, just outside of D.C. He was at a mall giving a speech and someone shot him. So, I want to know what their connections are to them, because they go visit him later to do faith healing. So much like another similarity to the Mormons, this is the group doing faith healing on laying on of hands on George McGovern.
Very weird. Yeah.
How dark would that be if George McGovern, they were related to the crippling of George McGovern, to later then go to his office and be like, oh, we'll heal you.
Sounds like something they would do.
Right. And that same process research group has identified all the people in here, because some of the folks in the newspaper article were misidentified. Another common trope amongst these things, when you do find these people in periodicals and stuff, oftentimes it's giving the wrong names and other false information. But that research group over there, Dana and Rotting Jules and her crew, they identified the founding members here. You can see in other pictures above the shot with McGovern.
Wow, good job. Yeah.
Oh, they do some great work over there. I've been studying the process stuff a lot, and they're always, like I said, Dana and her crew over there have always continued to surprise me with some of the stuff they dig up.
Wow.
Other researchers too. I had a guy on, Jonathan Mitchell, a few weeks ago on a Friday show with myself and Nick at the Occult Rejects, and Jonathan's written a book about the cult activity in Yonkers and Westchester County preceding the Son of Sam, so like the 1920s up until the 1970s, and now he's kind of investigating all these other aspects around the Son of Sam in the 70s and digging up some very interesting stuff for sure.
Wow. Yeah, it's always, the occult comes up so often and in the weirdest places, right? Like the churches and all this stuff that you're like, that can't be true. And that's how people just blow it off, Right. Yeah. Call it a church, slap a cute name on it, best friends and whatnot.
Right. I was going to say, or an animal shelter, and we'll just call it best friends, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, boy. Well, and everybody loves animals. Like, not everybody, but a lot of people. So, yeah.
So
that would be.
Yeah. So, one of the interesting aspects about their current operations, besides their funding and logistics and everything else, they adopted the pit bulls from the Michael Vick dogfighting ring.
Oh, wow. Right? That's interesting.
Allegedly, perhaps one of those pit bulls, allegedly a pit bull, would later maul and kill Marianne de Grimston in 2005. That's the story.
Wild. That's what they're saying, huh?
Yeah. And once I got my hands on their corporate documents from the Ed Sanders files, their articles of incorporation, they're out of Louisiana. First of all, their organization publicly, as they state, is completely different than their articles of incorporation. So I suspect they're following the articles of incorporation, and the public facing stuff is nonsense. That's my suspicion.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Part of that is they call Marianne, I believe she's referred to as the Oracle and the Pope of the church. It's very, very Vatican-like structure to their organization. New Orleans is the worldwide headquarters, according to their documents, right? They have they call them spheres, like regions. They call them spheres. They have regional stuff there as well, leaders and whatnot.
Like the eighth sphere, like that.
Oh, what's the eighth sphere?
This is all Steiner's work. Steiner and anthroposophy. It comes up a lot during the studies with JFK and all the things circled around that, which was weird for me. Theosophy and anthroposophy kept coming up, and there is specifically a place called the eighth sphere that he speaks about, and like how we live, combined with possibly other people that can't see us, or vice versa, or they can see us and we can't see them, but very Jewish sounding teachings, like where the demons would be filled. Yeah, this whole room would be full of demons if we could see them, they talk like that, but very interesting.
They attached to my body too, like body things of Scientology.
Right. And Casey's work talks about some of this as well. And so very interesting. I just spoke to a lady yesterday about the eighth sphere. So, and she's a big studier of Steiner's work. So yeah,
I'll have to look at that. That's interesting. I'll have to look at that. Cause I mean, as you say that, what I'm trying to build to here is that comparison I mentioned earlier with the corporate structure of the process in the Mormon Church that you had mentioned, a possible correlation with the Office of Special Affairs type situation with Scientology, right? So as I'm looking at their corporate documents, I presume they're following these things, right? So Marianne allegedly dies in 2005. In their corporate documents, it says these leaders from these other spheres, right? These different regions have to convene in New Orleans to appoint the new pope, right? And just so happens that the Best Friends Animal Society went to New Orleans in the fall of 2005.
Very weird.
They went there under the guise of saving animals from Hurricane Katrina, but who knows what else they were doing? Because again, as per their corporate documents, they had to go there to elect a new leader.
Very strange. And what were they calling themselves at that time when we're talking about spheres? Because they had 20 names.
that was their original articles of incorporation. So that was the 1968 document that they operated under until at least 1993, bare minimum. I'm sorry, wait.
I'm trying to find how many spheres they have. I'll try and look while you're talking. Because that's very interesting, right?
I think it is. Yeah, I think there's probably something more to that stuff, especially when you're talking theosophy, right? I mean, there's a lot of that crossover, the philosophies and theologies of these groups with theosophy, right? That's kind of the origin of these these ancient alien cargo cults all seem to have origins in theosophy, right?
So wild.
So in those corporate documents, besides these weird spheres and stuff, there's something called the Quorum of the 70. And I was like, come on.
Oh, that's too good. Come on.
Right. So, and it doesn't identify who this quorum is. It just refers to them numerous times as the Quorum of the 70, right? It doesn't say their Quorum of the 70, right? That's what I want. Like, I have a very noted theory that the reason they moved to Utah is because they've been operating under some sort of guidance from the Quorum of the 70s since the 1960s.
Wow.
Very now, is it the same Quorum of the 70? I can't prove that, right?
No.
But you know, you're aware of the Quorum of the 70 within the Mormon church, I'm sure. So,
the Quorum of the 50 that's hidden. You know about that?
I don't know about that.
There is a weird Quorum of the 50. I only found out about this very recently, and I was doing a bunch of research, and they are not the same. It's not the same. It's like more of a political, worldly prosperity type thing. I'll send some information to you. It's weird. It's very strange. I've never heard of it before. And I don't know that they're the same.
I hadn't either, but I wouldn't be surprised that there are some sort of, because like look at Freemasonry, right? Like you qualify for other groups when you join, so like, but the folks outside and some of the folks apparently inside the organization have never heard of these groups, right? So
okay,
I kind of
Council. Sorry, Council of the 50 is a political organization in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that was established in 1844 by Joseph Smith. This council was intended to represent a future kingdom of God on earth, and not all of the members are LDS, by the way. Yeah, very weird.
How does that work?
I don't know. Right? They keep it under wraps. I've been a Mormon more than half my life and never heard a thing about this ever in my life. So
yeah, nor have I heard of somebody outside of the church somehow dictating policy within the church. That seems
so weird. Yeah,
very odd.
It's weird. Yeah.
So, as far as the Quorum of the 70 goes within the LDS, is my understanding that this is kind of like the core decision makers, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because they're directly led by the 12 apostles, right? The 12 folks that are like the how would you explain the relationship of the 12 apostles, the Quorum of the 12 and the Quorum of the 70 here relative to the hierarchy?
I mean, yeah, definitely. It's like it's the top is the prophet, and then the three, his administrators, the first, second counselor, then goes down to the 12, then goes down to the 70. But definitely the 12 are extremely important. I mean, hugely influential. But the weird thing is, like I said, there's also that the special affairs committee on that committee. So it almost seems to me like there's a shadow government inside the LDS church, right? Because we've got the 70, but we've got the 50, and we've got the 12, but we've got this special committee that doesn't report to the 12. So it seems like they just made another branch to do their dirty business. That's how I agree. Anyway,
that's exactly how I look at it. That's That's what makes me wonder if this Quorum of the 70 and this other documents that doesn't describe what the Quorum of the 70 is or who comprises it within their corporate documents, they're referring to it almost like it's an outside agency or something like that. That's the way I kind of perceive it. And again, as soon as I read that, I'm like, Quorum of the 70. I'm like, I know a Quorum of the 70, and they're in Utah as well, right? So why is this organization the process / Best Friends Animal Society Sanctuary? The varying name changes that we now go through here. Why are they in Kanab, Utah? And why are they operating under the guidance of something called the Quorum of the 70?
Weird. Yeah, that seems like something is off. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had that corporate document to pull up right now. I'll have to email that to you later. I did not have that one.
That's okay.
So,
Yeah, that's great.
But, being in Kanab, I think you'd have to agree with me. Like, you're not running a large scale operation of any sort, nonprofits, corporations, whatever, without the concurrence of the Mormons, the mothership in Salt Lake City.
Definitely not. You're not going to last. You could do whatever you want and you can incorporate and do whatever, right? But you're not going to last. They're going to chase you out of town. Simple as that.
Yeah, and it's strange. So one of the kids that grew up on that ranch. So when they moved to Kanab, again, I believe it was 84 when they first moved there, but they don't incorporate there until years later there, in the 90s. But one of the kids that grew up there on the ranch there in the Angel Canyon Ranch is what it's called. Down there in Kanab, just north of Kanab. It formerly served as a
Skinwalker Ranch.
Skinwalker Ranch. It's probably it may in fact be creepier than Skinwalker Ranch because so allegedly they're using more electricity than the like most of the southern portion of Utah apparently on this one ranch, and they somehow own all the water in the area. It's on their property, and it used to be a film ranch, a film studio. So it was owned by Disney and other film studios, and they filmed the last movie I on record filming there was in 1976. It was The Outlaw Josie Wales starring Clint Eastwood.
Okay. Very, very interesting knowing Disney's, I don't know if you've looked into it, but Disney has a lot to do with the Mormon Church. They were good buddies.
I did not know that.
They are. And
outside of the Werner von Braun film?
That with the Werner von Braun thing, but also other connections. And it's very interesting. It always makes me think that, they always talk about these keys of the priesthood. And they always kind of hold themselves a little higher. When you're a Mormon and this, they're always like, we're the one true. We have the knowledge. They just don't know, and it's very like that. It's very superiority complex. And it feels like they're holding some things, right? They've got something.
Yeah, and I think there's a deeper connection between Hollywood and the Mormons than Mormons would like people to believe on and above just the Disney angle. So the guy who started the film festival, Robert Redford's film festival out there,
Sundance.
Yes. I was gonna call it Sunset, but I knew that wasn't it. He was deeply connected to the Mormon hierarchy, and he is in all sorts of unscrupulous activity.
Well, we have to get back to the point that these prophets, the current prophet of the church, his daughter was involved in the Pace Papers, and that's a fact. She was named in a lawsuit.
Ballard's daughter.
That was held without prejudice. And, specifically speaking, we're talking about ties to all kinds of high up people that people just can't wrap their heads around the fact that this might be true, right? Like these nefarious, sexual, weird, like all this stuff. But so they just throw it away because they're like, not possible.
Right.
That's how far it goes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, those well-groomed suits and dresses and smiling faces. They go a long way with dispelling these kind of activities and rumors. Well, look at Chad Daybell. He was deeply connected to the hierarchy of the Mormon Church, even as a fundamentalist Mormon. Yep.
Well, and Daybell, I postulate that the people that get the second anointing and are high up in this end of the world business, I believe when you look at people like the Daybells, when you look at people that seem crazy, right? Like Ruby Frankie. And you see these things pop up time and time again. They all go back to like one thing. And then these people, they're like, oh, that has nothing to do with us. That's over there. But why does it attach to Tom Harrison and all these things? And they've still not took that book off their shelves or said like, that's, out of here. I mean, come on. They're
still on the approved reading list, huh?
Yep. And I think there's a cult. There's a cult inside the cult, honestly,
Yeah.
My opinion.
Makes you wonder, really. Yeah, I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, this Hollywood connection seems very odd to me relative to the process as well, not just in Kanab. So They bought that land. It's really dubious, much like their incorporation records. Getting into their real estate records is very dubious. There are reports at one point in time in the late 70s, so 78, that Jack Nicholson was looking to purchase some of that land there, the old movie ranch studio land there in Kanab, Utah. And apparently Disney owns an adjoining property still today, it seems. Whether or not it's filmed there or not, who knows? But they filmed such things as holes there in the 1990s in that adjoining property, right?
Okay, that movie, dude, with the digging, right? And then we know, like, okay, we're talking about Joseph Smith and the plates, and we're talking about people like Seymour Cray. What were they all doing when they had this knowledge imparted upon them, right? They're digging all the time. I think that was a nod to some things, honestly.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's probably got a deeper esoteric meaning for sure. And it's odd. Again, it's filmed. So that, the process is next door to that filming, right? Like they're living there right next door.
Yes. So weird.
So
yeah,
things are still being filmed in the area, but the main properties that they purchased back in the early 80s there, that's that was all movie studio stuff. Again, the property they owned, the Outlaw Josie Wales, was filmed on that. And then you look at Manson, right? And his process activities in the late 60s in LA. Well, they're living on Spawn Movie Ranch. That's an active movie ranch. It's an active film location. They act like it was closed down. It wasn't. John Wayne, I saw a photo and I have to try to dig it back up. John Wayne is out on the movie ranch, and you can see Manson family folks in the photograph. He's out there filming a commercial for somebody in like 1968.
Wow. That's weird.
Right. It's super weird. Steve McQueen, who was allegedly supposed to be at the Tate LaBianca house, the Tate Polanski house the night of the murders, his career was also made by Bob Evans, and he would later steal Bob Evans' wife a few years later. It's a different story altogether.
It's always happening.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a lot of sex cult activity, if you ask me, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's
he allegedly meets a woman at a gas station on the way to the house that night and doesn't get murdered. But he's also, connected to the Spawn Movie Ranch through various, appearances up there. So there's, a lot of characters, even in the late 60s during this allegedly closed movie ranch the Manson family was living at. It's not a closed ranch. And, they were deeply integrated into Hollywood. And then you look at the process activities in Westchester County in the late 70s or the early 70s. I'm sorry. They buy a property that abuts another movie ranch out in Westchester County, and nature preserve that is frequently utilized by Hollywood dating back many decades is a neighboring property to their location that they purchase.
Wow. That's weird.
So Hollywood's around this whole situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely included in, I mean, you can kind of look backward on things oftentimes, and there's a lot of actors and actresses in general, even still, that came out of Mormonism or cults, right? Like River Phoenix and all these weird things. Like, I mean, it can't just be a coincidence. There's no way.
There's a very controversial actor in Hollywood that is now married to Charles Manson's former fiance. So when Manson died, he was engaged to a young lady. I think she's about 23 at the time, maybe 25, something like that. She is now married to a very controversial Hollywood figure actor that I would claim is the root of this kind of this movement still today.
Huh. Very odd. Have to look up the fiance's name and find that trail. I'm sure we don't want to talk about it.
No, I don't mind it because I'll mention why I'm saying he's so controversial. So the guy's name's Vincent Gallo, right? His career's often been made by people directly related to Bob Evans. So Bob Evans can in large part be, or this network. So, Bob Evans has a network starting with, they have a network of restaurants, the Sausage King of Ohio, but this is Cocaine Bob Evans of Los Angeles I'm talking about. He's got a network of directors, actors, and whatnot underneath him, including folks like Francis Ford Coppola, James Caan, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro. These are the people who he made their careers. Roman Polanski, Steve McQueen, right? Jack Nicholson, right? These are the people Bob Evans made their careers, and you see this extenuation of this umbrella network later on throughout the weird activities in Hollywood, right? So I think it was around 2005, maybe 2004. This Vincent Gallo fella, who's related to the Buffalo Mob family Gallo, and they have a member of that family in the Paramount Plus miniseries The Offer, which is the making of The Godfather. So you have the straight connection back to this whole story when you have one of these Buffalo Gallows starring in that series. Vincent Gallo is another Buffalo Gallo connected to the same Gallo mafia family out of Buffalo. He does an independent film in the early 2000s when he's kind of already established himself as an actor. He films, this is not a pornography, but he films does not simulate oral sex. He has the actual actress perform it, and he's the actor receiving it in the film that he's directing.
Oh, well.
It's called Brown Bunny.
Oh, boy.
It ended both of these people's careers. The actress Chloe Sevigny did not act for many years. Her next appearance is in maybe 5 years later in a very small role in a film called Zodiac, strangely enough, also related to these kind of cold activities, the Zodiac killings. But she plays Robert Graysmith, the main character's wife, in a very, very small part. Vincent Gallo would not act for anything else. No one else is giving this guy a job after this, right? Like it did very much ruin their careers. But I say that makes you wonder why they made it, right? Like, what was the purpose of making this? In the first pornography filmed and released, Deep Throat was financed by the New York Mafia, right? Elements connected to the production of The Godfather, the Colombo crime family. Joseph Colombo is essentially the executive producer of the film Godfather. His underboss, Sonny Franchise, or Franchise, how you pronounce it, he was a big Hollywood financer. He financed the film Deep Throat, the pornography. It premiered at a Hollywood porn theater called the Pussycat Theater, owned by The Process.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Bonanno's on the board of Permindex.
Yep. Yeah, and Bonanno was apparently the head of the five families at that time, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so
big circle. I mean, yeah. It's just
so it's hard to call any of these things like it's hard to call it cults, it's hard to call it mafia, it's hard to call it spook operations, it's hard to call it Hollywood, it's hard to call it Mormon stuff because they're all intertwined and interlinked,
all
right?
The same. Yeah.
So like I realize the Process Church is the proper name for the organization. The Process Church is the final judgment. However, I also refer to it in a literal sense. This is the process. This is the process in which these organizations are going to network in together and do hood rat shit. Yeah.
They're telling you right there. You know, they're kind of letting you know with the name. I mean, obviously, you know, wild.
Yeah, so when I see this Vincent Gallo character in our current modern era, how do these things relate today, right? Like when I see that, I'm like, oh, wait a second. And he's engaged or he's married to Charles Manson's former fiance. Like, that's weird. Like she left, Manson dies, and then he.
Uh-oh. Well, we must have touched a nerve because you're frozen. Oh, shit. We hit a nerve, JJ. We hit a nerve.
So if I can provide you some closing statements on these topics, Adi, and I'll answer anything else you got questions on or whatnot. But so this relates to the modern era through things like Vincent Gallo and those connections, the mafia, Manson, and weird pornography stuff in Hollywood, and then you got Tom O'Neill, who speaks of this Vincent Gallo character only in passing. He writes the book Chaos, allegedly the end all be all of the Manson tale, which I have a lot of questions about that because he fails to mention the process, coincidentally enough. And he hangs out with folks like the Neo Process members, such as Marilyn Manson. He likes to joke around about doing drugs with Marilyn Manson, but and then Tom O'Neill, he just released the Netflix series, right? The Chaos Netflix series. He introduced that for the first time on a podcast of Rick Rubin, famed Hollywood music producer Rick Rubin's podcast, The Tetragrammaton. This is maybe back in the summertime. Is when he first, teased this new series coming out, and they started talking about the process in that conversation, and they both claimed to not know anything about it. And Tom O'Neill changed the narrative and says now they disbanded in 1985, right, instead of 74. But the funny thing about that is them both not claiming to know anything about it. Tom knows process people. I can demonstrate that in a much longer conversation. But on his face, Rick Rubin obviously knows process people. He produced the album of Skinny Puppy, the electronic music industrial rock band in the 90s called The Process. And it's literally the theology of the Process Church in an album. And the members of that band I have on podcasts bragging how they're the intermediary party between the old process, the original process, and what they call the Neo Process.
Oh, the
evolution. Rick Rubin, what's that?
The evolution of the process, right?
Yeah, I think a lot. Yeah, I think a
Boy.
lot of the things they're involved in have evolved as well. So I think that's a good way to look at it. Is an evolution. So these things are still affecting our modern era. These people are still claiming not to know each other when obviously Rick Rubin produces the Process album. Has Skinny Puppy and Genesis Peorage kind of one of the main figureheads in the neo process movement. They're all at his Malibu Beach home doing this album in the early '90s. And again, folks like William Morrison, I don't think any relation to Jim Morrison. I did look. William Morrison, a member of the band, is on record saying he's a priest in the Satanic Temple,
Oh.
out of Salem, Massachusetts, Lucian Greaves group. He's
Oh,
on record saying that he's the what's that?
That one's a deep dive there.
You know them? You know the Satanic Temple?
I know, yeah, about Lucian Graves and his weird eye. Yeah.
His bulky eye.
Oh my gosh. That he won't say how it happened. I'm like,
right. It's a mystery, right?
Weird.
So he's first. So first of all, he's not the first Lucian Greaves. He's the second Lucian Greaves. The first Lucian Greaves appeared alongside Doug Mesner back in 2014 in a Satanic Temple event in Los Angeles. I can send you some records of that.
Very weird.
He is the head of the Satanic Temple, but at the time he was not playing the part of Lucian Greaves. Somebody else was. So William Morrison and him are tight. William Morrison is the head of the Detroit chapter of the Satanic Temple, I believe, the Skinny Puppy guy. And
wow.
And William Morrison is the one bragging that he's the connecting person between the old parties and the new parties, and that he even says the process never disbanded. That's his own words. And up there at the headquarters of the Satanic Temple in Salem, Massachusetts, Lucian Greaves / Doug there, he's got an e-meter. The old Scientology hold the cans and we're going to read your mind e-meter. That's because the process had their own e-meter. They just called it the P-scope. Same device, new name, right? They call it the P-scope. And Doug's up there, or Lucian's up there claiming that he's going to perfect the use of it. He claims not to be connected to the process, right? But he has a P-scope. He has a process tattoo on his arm, and he runs a website called theprocess.org.
Huh. Very interesting.
But he claims he's not associated with the process.
Yeah, no, nothing to do with that. No,
never heard of it. Never heard of it.
Wow, that is weird. That is super weird. And I wondered, speaking of nowadays, how does Teal Swan fit into any of this? Does she fit in?
You know that's a good question. I mean, she certainly could. I'm not aware of any. I'm vaguely familiar with some of her background relative to the Levitt situation. I haven't really found any direct crossovers there, but I mean, there's something to be said with the Levitts and their political machinations to Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
You familiar with that narrative?
Yep.
So,
and let alone their his little press conference, right?
Oh yeah,
he's not a cannibal.
People, I don't need people press conference.
I'm like, nobody asked you. Weird. So
Absolutely.
Weird.
So he's deeply connected with the Biden-Obama machines over there in Ukraine with some nonprofit situation, right? And at the same time, so this is a few years ago, he's over there, and at the same time, this is the best I can give you as far as a direct correlation with the process and the Levitt, the Swan situation. He's over there with this nonprofit situation. It's been acclaimed, some sort of human trafficking of even Native girls at times, right? But also over there is the Best Friends Animal Society.
Oh boy!
At the same time,
are they all living at his castle?
Right. Also, at the same time is director Josh Zeman, documentary director Josh Zeman.
Wow.
Filming a documentary about animals behind. This is allegedly behind the in a war zone, right? So why are all these people over there? What they're all doing? I don't know. How are they all connected? I can't directly tell you.
But it's on Biden's laptop.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Oh my gosh. Well, and it does. I mean, it's laughable, but at the same time, like we talk about this stuff, and I'm like, and then blah blah blah, and Khashoggi, and blah blah blah, and this, and you just see how far it goes into everything. It's everywhere. Like, it's scary.
Did you know Khashoggi has Scientology connections?
Oh, that does not surprise me. He was very involved with the church here for quite some time. And, right along with the Rotary Club, like a lot of things don't make sense. Like, why are there Mormons in the Rotary Club? Like why are these big top people in this club at all? right? Back then we weren't supposed to take any oaths, and we weren't supposed to be in
Right.
clubs and all this stuff. But yet here we are. And it's just one big Ouroboros. We'll say that.
I agree.
Yeah. It's too many. There's too many things. And then that's not even touching on Hamblin, right? When we talk about the native situation and
Sure.
that whole thing. Oh my gosh, which connects, and all of it goes back to like even to Frankie. Like when you go back to the whole thing, I can't remember. I did a little expose on it with the one that they all worked for. What's her name? Their little therapist, Jody Hildebrandt, was connected with Daybell through, and I have the picture of them all together at a conference, giving this conference, with Tim Ballard and all these people. And you're just like, wow, isn't that convenient? You know?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's an odd. There's some strange bedfellows there, but Daybell's connected. There's no doubt about that.
100%. And what did he do? He jumped straight from the Mormons to the Catholics without even a breath. And I'm like, oh, well, there you go. I mean, it's just funny to me, the nods that are happening right now. It's almost like everybody's got their cards on the table and they're going to call the game at any time, right? Like everybody's ready, and they are all kind of messing with each other now.
About that. Yeah. This is a very interesting time with a lot of people, seeming to be warring factions, if you will. A lot of disagreements, a lot of feuds.
Everybody wants to rule the world.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, no matter how crazy some of this stuff sounds, it may sound full blown Looney Tunes. I agree, but these things, like, because again, it's the idea of these things occurring, and like, how could it be shut down? How could it be covered up? How can it be, et cetera? And not only, with wealth and organizations such as the Mormons or, whoever else, you're talking, folks that have hundreds of $1 billion slush funds to do whatever they want with, and or members within the hierarchy, within the structure of that, like quorums of the 70, who can execute such plans and financial transactions without even the oversight of some of the folks above them. Maybe. I'm just saying these things are compartmentalized, and to that point, and why we don't hear about these things and why it's such a mystery in the compartmentalization, I point to folks like Henry Kissinger and his associate, his right-hand man, retired Major General of the Air Force, Brent Scowcroft, a very prominent Mormon.
Yes, absolutely. This is actually funny, but I used to rent the Scowcroft mansion. I had a little corner office there. They rent it out now in Ogden. Creepiest shit you've ever seen in the basement.
So you're familiar with the family then?
Oh yes. Yes. And I'm going to start doing, I think, for my Patreon. I was talking to my husband this morning and I said, we are right here in Utah. Maybe I'll start going to some of these places for them,
that'd be cool.
Because it might be fun for them to see like these little things that I guess I take for granted because, I'm here, sure. But it is interesting to know that, we're talking about strange bedfellows. Well, look at 2-Bit Street in Ogden. If you've ever looked at why was Al Capone here running the streets in Ogden and running some underground business when this is out of the way nowhere, right? Why here? Like that doesn't even make any sense unless there's a reason for him to be here. And it's more than just alcohol or running alcohol, because honestly, Mormons knew how to do that. They didn't need anybody for that.
I had no idea Al Capone was in Ogden, Utah.
Oh, big player. So my grandpa was quite a hellion when he was young, and he was from Chicago. And my uncle was actually very involved in the Sundowners. And I mean, he's passed away from, it was bad. He was the secretary of the Sundowners, and that doesn't mean you really do any secretarial duties.
Right.
But so my grandpa used to tell me stories all the time about this stuff. And I'm like, wow. And then I got older and I looked into it, and it's right. And some of the madams that they were running there, just a lot of strange ties to families you wouldn't think should have anything to do with that, right? The upper echelon.
Sure.
But once again, we get back to, bloodlines, bad guys, good guys. I mean, it's all relative when you get in a big association. The bad guys usually know the good path too. They just choose, right? They get to choose.
Sure.
And so even to this day, that's the case. And I know it's hard for people to swallow that possibly, these are some really scary, weird things we're talking about, but it doesn't mean the people at the top that present a certain kind of way are who they say they are. That's just not true.
Right?
Yeah.
Precisely.
And it's scary to me to see that people want to make these people their God. It's just weird. I don't know. Jesus said the same thing, right? They didn't want him. They wanted something better. They wanted their God. So, and it's just weird to me. But at this point, like, even if you look at some of the things that Charles Manson did with when they would interview him, and my husband was laughing yesterday because we were watching a little snippet and he was doing his little boo-boo. And I'm like, I bet that's an occultic practice. I bet he's doing something there. Right.
Oh, absolutely. The dancing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And what did we see happen with the West Memphis Three, who, by the way, Damien Eccles is obsessed with Joseph Smith and has a whole video dedicated to him on his channel where he actually teaches people how to do magic. And I mean, actual like magic. And it's very strange to me to know that he actually made it work for him. He talks about how he was doing all these magical practice on the daily to get out, and he did. I mean, that's pretty wild.
And Manson hang out with Tom O'Neill together. Who knows, right? Because
and what's
Johnny
his name?
Depp.
The actor. Yes, wild.
What? There's another friend. There's another friend in that little crew that often gets ignored, and that's Joe Rogan's buddy, Doug Stanhope.
I 100% tell my husband all the time, Joe Rogan isn't who you think he is. I'm sorry. Like, no, it's just not. I'm sorry to squash your dreams, but it's just not,
His two of his best friends are that directly associated with this crew. Duncan Trussell had Damien Eccles on his TV show, convicted child murderer. And then Doug Stanhope runs around with Eccles, Depp, and Manson. So
weird. And not just a murderer, a mutilator, pedophilic mutilator. It was awful. And Ramsey writes a good book about that. But I just am like, all of these things, when you put them together, I know they don't seem like they should fit, but you have to remember the occult is called the hidden things, right? Where they're not going to put it on a table for you. And I postulate with the whole, Yale Skull and Bones coming to set up out here in Utah, where that was the family members. I believe it was of Brigham Young, wasn't it? Was it Pratt? Can't remember.
I think it was Pratt.
Pratt. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, there's a reason why things happened here. It didn't just happen. That's the only time that's ever happened, period. Yale didn't do that for anybody else. So I don't know.
It's a good point. It's a very mysterious situation. And I look again, I look at all these things and why don't we know more about these things, right? Like, what is the, I know the current fervors about the comments from the Attorney General. I'm reserving my comments on the Attorney General Pam Bondi because in her relations to Scientology, but and not prosecuting Epstein for not properly registering as a sex offender when she was the Florida Attorney General. Nonetheless, she made comments saying that there's national security concerns related to the release of those files. Well, I would argue the reason why we don't know about any of these process-related activities, crimes, and associated children crimes as well, that it's also for that same purpose. And again, back to pointing to folks like Kissinger and the prominent Mormon there, Brett Scowcroft, these two men have been running the national security state in America for the last 60 years, essentially.
And then to see it like rise above in such a powerful position where they were nobody, run out of everywhere, being shot at, really, Mormons. And then all of a sudden they become powerful and in the government. What?
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder.
With the finishing of the railroad here. Yeah.
Well, you have a lot of that, back and forth between the U.S. government and the Mormons over the years. It makes you wonder how they've achieved this kind of relationship they are at today. It does seem odd. Again,
absolutely.
Scowcroft is a fellow, much like Kissinger. They're the guys. It takes, I believe, 3 people to stamp something national security, and these are the guys that have been the national security advisor for numerous U.S. presidents, and they're the guys stamping things. And Scowcroft, again, a prominent Mormon. So I have to wonder why, again, back to the establishment of the process best friends folks into Utah, is this related? Because Scowcroft, much like his boss Kissinger, so they were also outside of government. They had a private corporation, the Kissinger and Associates. Scowcroft was the VP. Kissinger's associated with old cocaine Bob Evans, something the tabloids back in the 70s could never explain. And I always wondered why Kissinger, the prominent figure in the Nixon administration, is running around with cocaine Bob all the time, right? Well, you fast forward many years, and Scowcroft, his assistant, is a fellow by the name of J.J. Bryan. And J.J. Bryan, he got busted for some spook operations in Lebanon and around the time he's working for Scowcroft. But then immediately following that time, he starts a neo-process chapter movement out of art galleries in New York, D.C., Miami, and I believe Los Angeles, called the Vector Art Gallery. The logo to the art gallery is literally the Process Church logo.
Oh, that's fun. Okay. And speaking of logos and Manson and the German association with this, like, do you want to comment anything on that? Because that the Mormons are going to be 100% sympathy towards World War II on the wrong side. I mean, I mentioned it, but they have
the white national
values.
aspects of the Mormon theology. Yeah, I mean, there's these are
ties.
These are so I think these folks find agreement in certain topics: the ancient alien cargo cult topic, the white nationalist topic, the ceremonial magical topic. Right? They have overlap in their interests and belief systems where they will find agreement and work with each other at times, and probably find disagreement as well. But nonetheless, these are the connecting principles, I think, between the Nazis. When you see Werner von Braun in a Mormon film by Disney, these are the connecting principles. They're, the white nationalism
with Charlie's swastika on his head, right? Like, it's just weird. Right. Yeah.
Well, that swastika is really a stylistic version of the Process Church symbol is a stylized version of the swastika, which, that is, in my opinion, what Charlie's putting on his head there, and is the members of his family were sewing onto their clothes there in jail.
And didn't the girls do X's, if I remember correctly?
They started with an X, on their heads, But they were apparently sewing the logos into the Process logos into their clothing while in jail.
Just like garments, you mean?
Yeah, like their
emblems. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, and I mean, it goes back to, that's once again going to hit back to theosophy, like the white brotherhood of the North and all this, and, all their different things. Like every single time it's like one guy with 10 girls and, they're trying to spread their seed. And then Epstein's the same way at his ranch. We got some weird genetic stuff going down. Like, there's been a lot of talk, and then we get into the Mormons' obsession with, bloodlines, genealogy. It's weird. It's very strange.
And there's these weird epicenters of activity, with the genetic stuff and like Epstein stuff there, for sure. But I always see these crossovers with all these major events. Like I was just recently comparing, or going deeper in a case that I cover on Operation GCD and a collaboration on a number of conversations with the Occult Rejects and Wicked Planet. And that's the Idaho 4 murder case. Mormons are all up in that too. And I don't like to, I don't like to draw correlations because it is Idaho, it's heavy Mormon country. But and I don't like to look into folks, even the victims or surviving folks, family situations, unless it's relevant, right? Well, it became relevant last week when they unsealed some documents in that case. One of the surviving roommates allegedly called her father before she called 911. So as the story goes, she was in like a frozen shock phase. And then when she got snapped out of that, she called 911. The 911 transcript they released and the text messages they released have completely blown out that story. There was no frozen shock phase. And before she calls 911, she calls her father. Well, her father is in a long line of men from a pioneering Mormon family where they've all served missions.
Of course, probably overseas missions, but yeah,
I think I looked at their mission records for all the men. So I got a fellow by the name of Peter Mortensen, migrated from Denmark, joined the church in Denmark. The LDS sent Mormon missionaries to Denmark in 1850. He's one of their converts. He moves over and does the wagon train west in 1856. He serves a mission. I believe his was overseas. I believe his sons were overseas. The rest of them are all domestic.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. So the surviving roommate in that case, her father she's the 5th great granddaughter of Peter Mortensen, So her father's the fourth great grandson. And so, from Peter Mortensen to the fourth great grandson, only the first two seem to have served out of that, six seem to have served overseas missions. But
well, this has been fascinating. I mean, we could talk all day. I don't want to keep you in hostage.
No, it's a great conversation. Great conversation.
But
I hate to be long-winded. I got a lot of words on these topics. So
no, I actually like it. I'm always 2 hours at least. So JJ, remind everybody where to find you once again.
Heidi, appreciate the invite. Great conversation. Folks of the interwebs, JJ Vance, host of Operation GCD, not the vice president. Live every Wednesday and Friday at YouTube, Rumble Twixter, 7 p.m. on Wednesdays and 9 p.m. Fridays with the Occult Rejects on Friday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, I can't wait to be on. I can't wait to chat with you again. And this has been great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thank you.